In the very late 2000s, the Volkswagen Jetta's groundbreaking clean diesel engine was hailed for meeting America's stringent emission standards. In fact, for 7 years, Volkswagen Group boasted and flaunted the eco-friendly credentials of its Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche cars. One memorable advertisement even showed the Green Police stopping a line of smog-belching cars while waving a single righteous Audi through with the words,
"Clean diesel. You're good to go, sir."
But a few years later, America would rescind its praise of the cars under the Volkswagen Group. It turns out Volkswagen rigged their cars to cheat on pollution tests. Almost 600,000 Volkswagens in the U.S. alone weren't green at all. The heinous part of it all? It was deliberate. Managers and employees knew for years they were cheating. Today we're talking about the Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal, also known as Dieselgate. In 2014, the EPA and the California Air Resources Board were tipped off by researchers about so-called defeat devices in the Volkswagen cars. Basically, software detected when cars were being tested for emissions compliance, and then it would adjust the engines so that they passed the test. But in real road settings, the engines emitted far more pollution, not by a small margin, but even by up to 40 times more nitrogen oxide. The defeat devices could switch between two modes. In test mode, the cars perfectly complied with all federal emissions requirements. But once you got on the road, it's a different story. The onboard computer switched to a separate mode. This significantly changed everything from the fuel pressure to injection timing and exhaust gas recirculation. The thing is, Volkswagen owns 70% of the U.S. passenger car diesel market. Volkswagen installed these cheat devices on more than 500,000 diesel cars in the U.S., not to mention 10.5 million cars worldwide. The Volkswagen Group is the largest car maker in Europe. The group controls several other known brands, including Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche, so you can imagine the impact. The irony, or rather the hypocrisy of all this, is their cheating was exposed years after they had been publicly promoting clean diesel as an alternative to hybrid and electric vehicles. This scandal is now dubbed as Dieselgate or Emissionsgate. The defeat devices were found in various Volkswagens, Audis, and Porsche models ranging from 2009 to 2016. Bad enough that this happened, but even worse that none of these cars have been recalled, at least not yet. Volkswagen admitted to violating federal emissions laws, but not any U.S. state laws. Right now, the cars pass all state inspections, so it's not a state or safety issue. The consequence is that Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche aren't allowed to sell any new diesels. That is, unless we're talking about a few certain 2015 models. Also, these car makers can't sell most used diesels. Volkswagen has stated that right now they're committed to going electric. Now, if you have one of these cars, a U.S. federal district court judge named Charles Breyer appointed the final $14.7 billion settlement in 2016. Volkswagen was told to notify existing car owners who were impacted. There was a $10 billion buyback program to buy back the 500,000 Volkswagen TDI models with 2-liter engines. Owners received a fair replacement value of their cars. Basically, they could sell their cars back to Volkswagen for between $12,500 and $44,000. It depended on the model, trim, age, and region. But the lawsuits didn't stop there. In January 2018, Volkswagen themselves sued one of their former executives, Oliver Schmidt. He ended up being sentenced to federal prison for his role in Dieselgate. If you're wondering why they sued him instead of helping him, well, that's just it. They did help him, but they wanted their money back. Volkswagen had spent huge legal costs to defend Oliver. Over $4 million, in fact. And now they wanted to recover a large part of the legal costs. In January 2017, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a $4.3 billion in criminal and civil penalties against Volkswagen, and they arrested 6 Volkswagen executives for their connection with the Dieselgate scandal. Their convictions went from 7 years in prison plus hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. Volkswagen was ordered to buy back 85% of its cars by June 2019, and they have to spend $2 billion over the next 10 years to invest in green energy and electric cars. This includes paying for new public charging stations and public education programs. So they're not getting off easy, that's for sure. The funny thing, Volkswagen has seen its shares of ups and downs, scandals, and corporate intrigue. It got a lot of heat from 2014 to 2017 because of the emissions cheating scandal. But this general time period and the years leading up to it, it was also in the news, but for a different story. Market manipulation and corporate takeover. So, speaking of the Volkswagen Group, currently they own other car brands, including including Porsche. But about a decade ago, the tables almost turned the other way around. Here's a quick rewind. In the 1990s, Porsche wasn't doing too well. Not only was there a global crisis going on, but Porsche had an internal one. On top of that, the cars were starting to break down quickly, too. People's opinion of the brand quickly started to plummet. To put it in perspective, in 1986, Porsche had sold 52,000 cars. In 1993, they sold only 14,000. That's a drop of nearly 74%. So Porsche left the U.S. market. At that time, the U.S. had the largest car market in the world. So any company's decision to leave the market meant huge trouble, especially if we're talking about luxury cars. Porsche blamed their failure on everything, from the American economic plunge to the growth of the popularity of Japanese cars. By 1993, Porsche was losing $150 million a year. That's $2.8 million a week, or $410,000 every day. So it's no surprise that by the mid-1990s, Porsche was knocking on bankruptcy's door. But then came Wendelin Wiedeking. He had been working as a production director. And then in our hour of doom, Porsche promoted him to head the company. His task? Save the company from collapse. But before accepting the promotion, Wiedeking had one condition. He asked for 1% of the company's annual profit, if there would be any profit at all. Porsche was desperate, and so they accepted. And so Wiedeking got to work. One of his first decisions was to hire experts from Shingijutsu Consulting. Instead of blaming the company's failure on the Japanese, he looked to them for advice on how to improve operations. The founder of Shingijutsu, Yoshiki Wata, observed operations at Porsche. He thought it was appalling and commented that it looked like a mover's warehouse. Wiedeking and Shingijutsu got to work. Basically, they rebuilt the entire company from scratch by modernizing the production system based on Toyota's lean manufacturing methods. And in just 2 years, they saw significant results. Manufacturing time was reduced by 40%. The manufacturing area was downsized by almost 33%. The distance cars traveled on the assembly line was reduced by almost 74%. Manufacturing flaws per car were cut in half. At that time, the 928 and 968 models were unprofitable. So Wiedeking dropped both models. Now, Porsche still had its 911, but that car had been in the market since 1964. So Wiedeking overhauled the 911. He also developed the Boxster convertible. Not only did this new car look cool, but it was much cheaper too. The strategy worked because sales in 1997 doubled compared to the year prior. But there was a problem. Porsche had only 2 cars in the product line, the 911 and the Boxster. There was nothing else. So Wiedeking got the idea to design an even more unique car. An off-roader that could be driven like nothing else in its class. But he couldn't do it alone. So he went to Volkswagen and asked them for help in financing the expensive product for their production assets in Bratislava. In exchange, Volkswagen and Audi would get chassis for their cars designed by Porsche. Volkswagen accepted the deal, and that's how the Porsche and Volkswagen collaboration led to the creation of the Porsche Cayenne. The goal was to make an everyday car that would always stay relevant while retaining the Porsche flair. Production began in 2002, and by 2003, the Cayenne was out on the road. Despite a fair share of criticisms, the sales stats were quite impressive. In 2004, the sales volume of the Cayenne was the same as the sales of the 911 and the Boxster combined. Oh, and remember that bonus commission of 1% annual profit in Wiedeking's contract? It was still valid. So in 2005 alone, Porsche paid Wiedeking $20 million. He ended up becoming amongst the most highly paid executives in the car industry at that time. He was at the top of his game, but he wanted more. He wanted Volkswagen. Little did he know that his plans would soon get him into a lot of trouble. From 2003 to 2004, Porsche produced 70 to 80,000 cars, but Volkswagen produced millions. So Porsche, or more specifically Wiedeking, started to buy Volkswagen. He acquired 20% of Volkswagen shares for a cool $4.2 billion. Porsche stated that its motive was to ensure the independence of the Volkswagen Group. But as it turns out, there's a special law in Germany called the Volkswagen Law. It says that all persons or legal entities that own more than 20% of Volkswagen shares have a seat on the board and power to veto any decision. So now, with Porsche owning 20% of Volkswagen, no serious decision could be made without Porsche's consent. Porsche kept accumulating more and more Volkswagen until finally one man stepped in. That man was Ferdinand Piëch, the grandson of Ferdinand Porsche, the founder of Porsche and the inventor of the Beetle. He was also the chairman of the Volkswagen Group. Ferdinand Piëch had a reputation for being strict. Nobody dared argue with him. Wiedeking did to Porsche in the 2000s. Ferdinand did with Audi in the 1980s. The story goes on that his very first day as the head of Volkswagen, he fired all the inefficient managers and department heads. Just like that. And he stopped 8 of 12 production sites that he felt were inefficient. If someone tried to speak against one of his decisions at a meeting, he always gave the same response. I'm going to remember your name. Needless to say, he didn't mess with Ferdinand Piëch. Wendelin Wiedeking did. As the world watched Porsche try to take over Volkswagen, Piëch initially kept silent. Then came 2008. By then, the banks who had given Porsche credit wanted their money back. But Porsche didn't have the cash. Actually, they were almost $12 billion in debt. And then the global financial crisis hit. This was game over for Porsche. Porsche's sales plummeted by 27%. Even the German government rejected Porsche's request for financial help. And that's when Ferdinand Piëch chose to strike. Piëch held Wiedeking responsible for the imminent bankruptcy of Porsche, and he brought Wiedeking to account. In 2009, Wiedeking resigned with a severance package of 50 million euro. Today, the Piëch and Porsche families, the descendants of Ferdinand, are Volkswagen's largest shareholders. They own more than 31% of the Volkswagen Group. Guess what happened to Wiedeking? Volkswagen thinks his ambition got the best of him. He failed in his attempt to take over Volkswagen. What's more, Porsche and Wiedeking got sued in 2010, along with Porsche's former VP, Holger Hayerter. The lawsuit alleged they repeatedly misled investors and lied about Porsche's position and intentions with respect to Volkswagen. Basically, they said he was involved with market manipulation in the takeover bid. Later, the charges got dropped in 2016. But now you tell me, what's your opinion on cars from the Volkswagen Group? Do you think they'll ever make a comeback? Please share your opinion by commenting below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for your support.